Widow takes home a terrified stallion from an auction. What happens next is unthinkable. The gate of the trailer drops with a metallic groan, and for 3 full seconds, nothing moves. Then the stallion explodes backward into the light, hooves striking sparks off the ramp, a sound like thunder trapped inside a wooden box. Men scatter. A rope snaps taut and then whips free, useless, biting into the dirt. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman in a gray coat does not step back. She stands perfectly still while an animal twice her weight rears against the sky. And something in the way she watches him suggests this is not the first time in her life she has stood alone in front of something broken. If you have ever wondered what it costs a person to save something the whole world has already given up on, stay with this one until the very end, because the answer arrives in a place nobody expects, inside an old barn, under a rain that will not stop, and inside a stack of letters that were never meant to be read aloud to a horse. Before we go further, tell us where you're watching from tonight. Type your city in the comments. If you've ever had to rebuild something, a name, a family, a piece of land, after other people had already decided you'd failed, hit like and subscribe, because Annalise Vance is about to do exactly that, one cold night at a time, and you will want to see how far patience can carry a person who has nothing left to lose. The Blue Ridge County Livestock Auction sits at the bottom of a valley that fills with fog before the sun is fully up, and on the second Saturday of October, the fog does not lift until almost 10. Annalise Vance arrives at 9:40, alone, driving a truck with a dented tailgate and a trailer that has not hauled anything in 3 years. She parks at the far edge of the gravel lot, away from the trucks with fresh paint and dealer plates, and she sits behind the wheel for a full minute before she opens the door, the way a person sits before walking into a room where they know they are not wanted. She is 52 years old, gray threading through hair, she still pins back the way her mother taught her, and she moves through the world now with the careful economy of someone who has learned not to take up more space than necessary. 2 years ago, this same auction yard would not have looked at her twice, because 2 years ago she was still Daniel Vance's wife, and the Vance name meant something in these hills. Clean bloodlines, honest scales, a handshake you could build a season on. Now the handshake is gone. Daniel is gone. And the name that used to open gates now makes men lower their eyes and find something urgent to do with their hands. She does not go looking for judgment. She has had enough of it delivered to her doorstep, in casseroles that arrived with more pity than food, in phone calls that thinned out over the first winter and stopped altogether by the second. What she came for today is posted on a chalkboard near the auctioneer's platform. Third from the bottom, the entry nobody wants. A black Mustang stallion. Unbroken, temperament unknown, sold as is. No guarantee against injury to buyer. The horse is already in the holding pen when she walks the perimeter fence, and even from 30 yards she can see why the other buyers give that corner of the lot a wide, unspoken berth. He stands with his hindquarters pressed into the corner post, head high, nostrils working the air in short violent pulls, one eye rolled so far back that the white shows in a crescent. His coat is dull with dust and old sweat, ribs faintly visible beneath the black, a rope-burn scarred pale across his chest. Every few seconds his whole body flinches at nothing. At a slammed gate 3 pins over, at a child's laugh, at the auctioneer's amplified voice cracking through the loudspeaker. A man in a canvas jacket leans against the rail nearby, talking loud enough for the people around him to hear. He says the horse put a ranch hand in the hospital in July. He says the county's already got a file on him. He says the smart money skips this lot entirely and lets the state handle what happens next. And he says it with the particular relish of a man who enjoys being the one who knows things other people don't. Annalise does not join the conversation. She stands with her forearms resting on the top rail, watching the stallion the way a person watches weather rolling in over a ridge, not with fear, but with the quiet calculation of someone deciding how much time they have before it arrives. The horse's eyes find her once, briefly, and something in the movement of his head is wrong in a way she cannot yet name. A small hitch, a tilt that favors one side. By the time his lot number is called, the bidding lasts 11 seconds. Nobody wants him. The auctioneer's voice slows, then stumbles, then simply stops, and in the silence that follows, Annalise raises 2 fingers, and the number that comes out of her mouth is the reserve minimum, the number set by the state, so the sale counts as a sale and not a giveaway. The auctioneer looks at her the way you'd look at someone volunteering for something dangerous on a stranger's behalf. He asks if she's sure. She says she's sure. Somewhere behind her, the man in the canvas jacket laughs under his breath, not unkindly exactly, but with the tone of a man watching someone about to learn a lesson the hard way. And he says loud enough to carry that the Vance widow always did have a thing for lost causes. Annalise does not turn around. She signs the paperwork with a steady hand, and when the clerk asks for a name for the transfer, she writes Shadow, because that is what the tag on his pin already calls him. And because in the last 11 seconds she has already decided she is not going to be the one who changes it. The drive back to the Vance ranch takes 40 minutes on roads that climb and fall through stands of Douglas fir, and for the entire drive, the trailer behind her truck does not go quiet. Every mile or so the whole rig shudders with the impact of a body slamming into steel, and Annalise grips the wheel and keeps her speed low and even, the way you'd carry a glass filled past its rim. The ranch itself sits at the top of a long grade, 70-some acres of pasture that used to be considered some of the best grazing land in the county, now grown ragged at the edges where fences have gone unmended. The house is modest, white paint gone the color of old bone, and behind it stands the barn, a structure nearly a century old, its beams hand-hewn, half its roof stripped down to bare rafters where Annalise has been slowly replacing shingles herself, one Saturday at a time, because she cannot afford to hire the work done and will not ask anyone in this county for a favor. She backs the trailer up to the round pen at the edge of the north pasture, the pen with the highest fence on the property, 6 feet of rough-cut lumber that Daniel built the year they married. She lowers the ramp from a distance, using a length of rope threaded through the latch, and then she steps back, all the way back, past the gate, and she waits. For a long time, nothing happens. The trailer sits open and dark and silent, and the only sound is wind moving through the tall grass and a hawk somewhere far off making its slow circles. Then, so quietly it is almost missable, a black shape shifts inside the shadow of the trailer, and a hoof finds the ramp, and the stallion comes down into the pen the way a man might step off a ledge he isn't sure will hold him. Every muscle coiled, every sense pointed outward for the first sign of a trap. He circles the pen twice at a hard trot, testing the fence line, finding no gap, and then he stops in the far corner and stands with his head lowered just enough to watch her without seeming to. The way an animal watches something it has already decided it cannot trust. Annalise closes the outer gate. She does not go near the round pen. She walks back to the house, and if you were watching closely, you would notice that before she goes inside, she stops on the porch and looks back at the barn for a long moment, the way a person looks at a debt they have just decided to take on. That night, for the first time, she carries a folding chair and an old wool blanket out to the round pen, sets them down 8 feet from the rail, sits, and opens a small tin box she has kept on her nightstand since the funeral. Inside are letters, dozens of them, folded soft at the creases, ink faded to brown, written in a hand she would know anywhere in the world. She takes out the one on top, and in a low, steady voice, she begins to read it aloud into the dark. The stallion, from the far corner of the pen, goes utterly still. The letters were written over the better part of 30 years, the earliest of them dated before Annalise and Daniel Vance were even engaged, the latest just 11 days before the accident that took him. He was not a man given to speeches. He built fences and doctored sick foals and drove 3 hours to the state fair every August without complaint, and in front of other people he rarely said more than the weather required. But on paper, alone, something in him opened that never quite opened in the daylight, and the letters he left behind are full of a tenderness that the same town now circling her ranch like buzzards, never once saw him show. She reads 1 letter a night, not because she has planned it that way, but because after the first night, when she found herself still sitting in the folding chair an hour after the last page, cold clean through, she understood that something had shifted in the pen, and she was afraid to disturb whatever it was by changing the pattern. The stallion does not approach. Not on the first night, not on the second, but by the 3rd night, he has stopped pacing the fence line the moment she sits down, and by the 5th, he has begun to face her rather than stand with his hindquarters turned, ears swiveling toward the sound of her voice the way a man in a dark room turns toward the only source of light. The county does not give her the luxury of pretending this is a private matter for long. On the ninth day, a white truck with a county seal on the door comes up the long gravel drive, kicking dust that hangs in the still morning air long after the engine cuts. The man who steps out is tall, silver-templed, dressed in a pressed shirt that has never once seen barn work, and he carries a clipboard the way other men carry authority, as though it were simply an extension of the arm. Dr. Alastair Finch has been the county's livestock and sanitary inspector for 11 years, and before that, he ran a breeding operation 2 ridges over that once competed directly with the Vance name for every major contract in 3 counties. There is history between the families that predates Annalise's marriage into it, a rivalry that soured somewhere in the years before she arrived and never fully healed. And though Finch has never said an unkind word to her directly, there is something in the careful neutrality of his voice that has always felt, to her, like a held breath. He does not get past the gate before he sees the stallion. He stops walking. His clipboard lowers an inch, and for just a moment, so brief you would miss it if you blinked, something crosses his face that is not professional at all. It looks, if anything, like recognition. Then it is gone, replaced by the flat civility he wears like a second jacket, and he tells her, without much preamble, that a formal complaint was filed 3 days ago regarding an unregistered dangerous animal being harbored on the property, and that county code requires him to conduct an assessment. Annalise asks who filed it. Finch says that information is confidential, but his eyes drift, just once, toward the ridge road that leads down to the Holt place, and she does not need him to say the name out loud. He walks the fence line at a distance, clipboard in hand, watching the stallion the way a man watches a debt come due. The horse, sensing the stranger, has retreated to the far corner and stands with his head high, breath coming in short, hard pulls through flared nostrils, every line of his body drawn tight as wire. Finch writes for a long time without speaking. When he finally does, his voice carries the practiced calm of a man delivering news he has delivered before and does not enjoy delivering again. He tells her the animal presents clear signs of unpredictable aggression, consistent with the incident report from the auction facility. He tells her that under county ordinance, an animal deemed a public safety risk on a property without adequate containment and demonstrated control can be subject to seizure and humane destruction. And then he tells her, and this is the part that makes the wind seem to drop out of the whole valley, that she has 14 days to present the stallion, calm and controllable, before the Rural Commission, or the county will exercise that authority. He does not look at her when he says it. He looks at the horse the entire time, and something in the set of his jaw suggests this is a sentence he has already written in his head more than once. Annalise asks him, quietly, whether 14 days is standard. Finch closes his clipboard. He says it is generous, under the circumstances. He gets back in his truck without another word, and as he pulls away down the gravel drive, the stallion in the round pen finally exhales, a long shuddering breath that moves through his whole body like something breaking loose, and he does not stop watching the empty road for a long, long time after the dust has settled. Word travels fast in a county this size, faster than weather, and by the following afternoon, Garrett Holt is standing at Annalise's front gate with 2 other men from the Breeders' Council, all 3 of them dressed like they've come from somewhere more important than her porch steps. Garrett's family has run cattle and quarter horses on the ridge above the Vance land for 4 generations, and in the 2 years since Daniel's death, he has made no secret of his interest in the Vance acreage, prime grazing land, a water right that's been in dispute since before Annalise was born, and 70 acres that would, if consolidated with his own, put him in a position to sell the whole parcel to a development group already circling the valley for a proposed resort corridor. He is careful with his words, the way men are careful when they've rehearsed a conversation on the drive over. He tells her the community only wants what's best for her. He tells her that after everything she's been through, nobody would blame her for finally letting go of a place that's clearly become too much to manage alone. He gestures, without quite gesturing, at the barn with its stripped roof, at the fences leaning at odd angles, at the general shape of a property in slow collapse. Annalise lets him finish. She has learned, in 2 years of widowhood, that men like Garrett Holt say more when you let them run out of things to say than when you interrupt them. When he is done, she asks him, in a voice with no heat in it at all, whether it was his phone call that brought Dr. Finch to her gate yesterday. Garrett's smile does not move, but something behind his eyes does. He says the county has procedures for a reason. He says a wild animal on an unsecured property is everyone's concern, not just hers. And then, as he turns to leave, he says, almost as an afterthought, almost kindly, that 14 days is not very long, and that if things don't work out, he'd be glad to make her a fair offer before the bank gets involved. The truck pulls away, and Annalise stands at the gate for a long time after it's gone, watching the dust settle over the road the way it settled after Finch's truck the day before. Two different men circling the same piece of ground for two different reasons that have, without either of them quite admitting it, become the same reason. That night, she carries her chair out to the pen later than usual, well past dark, the sky already threatening rain. The stallion is waiting in a way he has not waited before, not pressed into the corner, but standing closer to the rail than he has ever stood, head lowered, one ear turned toward the house the whole time she crosses the yard, as though he has learned the sound of her footsteps and begun, in some wordless animal calculus, to separate them from the sound of every other footstep that has ever approached this pen. She sits. She opens the tin box. The letter she draws out tonight is one Daniel wrote the spring after they lost their first full season to a barn fire that took 11 horses and very nearly took the whole operation with it. A letter about starting over, about how a person rebuilds a thing not by pretending the wound isn't there, but by working around it, patiently, one board at a time, until the wound becomes simply part of the structure and not the whole of it. She reads it slowly. Halfway through, the rain begins, not hard, just a fine cold mist that beads in her hair and darkens the shoulders of her coat. And she does not stop reading, and she does not move to shelter, and somewhere in the middle of the second page, for the first time in 9 nights, the stallion takes 3 slow steps toward the rail and stops there, rain running off his black coat in dark rivulets. Watching her with an eye that no longer looks like it is measuring the distance to an exit. The rain does not let up for 4 straight days, turning the yard to soft mud and swelling the creek that cuts along the eastern fence line into something loud and brown and urgent. Annalise works through it, repairing a section of collapsed fencing along the lower pasture, hauling feed up from the barn in a wheelbarrow with a wheel that sticks, patching the section of roof over the tack room with a tarp that the wind keeps trying to tear loose from her hands. She is not a large woman, and there is a visible cost to this kind of labor at 52 that there would not have been at 30, but she does not stop, and she does not ask for help, because there is no one left in this county she trusts enough to ask. Every evening, regardless of the weather, she carries the chair and the tin box out to the round pen. The stallion now waits for her at the rail before she has even crossed the yard, and on the 12th night, something happens that changes the shape of everything that follows. She is reading a letter from the autumn Daniel proposed, a clumsy, half-finished draft he apparently never sent, found tucked behind the others, full of crossed-out lines and second thoughts, more honest in its unfinished state than any of the polished ones around it, when the stallion, without any warning at all, closes the last several feet of distance and lowers his head over the top rail until his muzzle hovers inches from her shoulder. Annalise does not move. She does not reach for him. She keeps reading, her voice unsteady for just a moment before it steadies again, and the horse stands there in the rain with his head lowered near her, breathing in slow, measured pulls until the letter ends. It is only afterward, when she finally lifts a hand, slowly, the back of her knuckles first, the way you'd offer scent to a dog you didn't fully trust, that she notices it. As her hand nears his left shoulder, near a patch of old scarring along the withers where the coat grows in coarse and uneven, the stallion's whole body flinches, not away from her, but into her hand, pressing the scarred patch against her palm with something that looks less like aggression and more like relief. A shudder running the length of him the way relief runs through a body that has been braced too long against a pain it never expected anyone to touch on purpose. She holds her hand there. The horse's breathing slows. And in the wet dark of that pen, for the first time since the auction, Annalise notices what has been wrong with the tilt of his head all along. Not defiance, not aggression, but the compensating posture of an animal favoring a blind side, keeping his good eye turned toward whatever might threaten him, keeping the ruined one angled away, the way a man turns his weaker shoulder from a blow he's learned to expect. The next morning, she calls the only veterinarian in the county who has never once treated her with the careful pity of the others, an older woman 2 towns over who examines animals other vets won't take on. It takes the vet less than 10 minutes with a pen light to confirm it. The stallion is blind in his left eye, an old injury, poorly healed, likely months if not years past its original trauma, calcified scar tissue where a proper suture should have been. Whatever happened to this horse? The vet says, quietly folding her instruments away. It happened a long time before that auction pin, and it happened to an animal someone once cared enough about to at least attempt stitches. Clumsy ones, but stitches, before deciding, for reasons the vet cannot begin to guess, to simply let him disappear. Annalise stands in the rain outside the round pen for a long time after the vet's truck pulls away, one hand resting on the top rail, watching the stallion graze with his blind side turned toward her, trusting her, for the first time, to watch the part of the world he cannot. 9 days remain before the commission hearing, and the discovery of the blindness changes nothing about the county's deadline and everything about the way Annalise begins to move through her work. She stops trying to gentle a dangerous animal and starts, instead, learning the specific geography of his fear, always approaching from his right, always speaking before she steps into his blind field, always keeping her movements slow and telegraphed on that ruined side the way you would move around someone recovering from a wound they haven't named yet. Progress comes in small, exact increments. On the 14th day since the auction, the same number, she notices, as the day she has left, she manages to slip a soft cotton lead rope around his neck for the first time, not to control him, simply to let the weight of it rest there while she reads, and he tolerates it with only a single hard flinch before settling. 2 nights later, she runs a curry brush along his neck and shoulder for the first time, working slow half circles over muscle gone stiff from months of tension, and somewhere in the middle of it his head drops low, lower than she has ever seen it, and his back leg cocks in the loose, hip-slung stance of an animal finally, fully at rest. It is during this grooming, on a gray afternoon with the barn roof still dripping from the last of the rain, that her hand catches on something beneath the thick winter coat growing in along his left flank. A raised patch of skin, old and pale, half hidden under new hair, shaped with a symmetry that does not belong to any accidental scar. She parts the hair with careful fingers. Beneath it, faint but unmistakable, is a brand, not fresh, years old, the edges softened by time, but its shape still legible if you know how to look at a brand the way people in this county have looked at brands their whole lives. It is not the auction lot's tracking mark. It is a ranch brand, a private one, and Annalise has seen this particular mark before, stamped into the corner post of a property 2 ridges over, a property that used to run some of the finest quarter horses in 3 counties before its owner sold off the breeding stock and reinvented himself, years later, as the man who now holds the authority to decide whether this very horse lives or dies. She sits back on her heels in the mud, one hand still resting on the brand, and for a long moment she does not move at all, the shape of an entirely different story assembling itself in the silence, one board at a time, the way a person's understanding of a betrayal sometimes has to be built before they can bear to look directly at it. She does not go to Finch immediately. For 2 days, she says nothing to anyone, working through her chores with the brand sitting in her mind like a held breath, turning the shape of it over the way she might turn over a stone to see what's living underneath. Instead, she drives 40 minutes to the county records office and requests archived breeding registrations for the Finch operation back before it dissolved, and the clerk, a woman who remembers Daniel Vance fondly and does not ask questions she doesn't need answered, pulls a decade-old file without comment. The registration confirms it. A black stallion, foaled on the Finch Ranch 19 years ago, registered under a name that means nothing to her, Cassius, with breeding records that stop abruptly 6 years back. No sale recorded, no transfer of ownership, no death certificate, nothing. The horse simply vanishes from the paperwork the same year. Annalise learns from a second document tucked loose in the folder that the county's insurance claims office processed a liability payout to a Finch Ranch employee for an eye injury sustained during a training incident. She sits in her truck in the gravel lot outside the records office for a long time, the folder open on the passenger seat, piecing together what the paper will not say outright but does not need to. An accident, an injury the ranch did not want attached to its name, a horse that had gone from asset to liability in the space of one bad afternoon, and a decision, made by a man who has spent the last 11 years standing in judgment of other people's animals, to simply make the evidence disappear into an unregistered sale, a name change, an auction lot 3 counties over where nobody would think to trace the bloodline back to him. The same man who arrived at her gate with a clipboard and gave her 14 days is the man who put this horse in that condition in the first place, and then let the world call him dangerous rather than admit what he had done to make him that way. She could destroy him with this. One copy of that file, laid in front of the Rural Commission on the day of the hearing, and Alastair Finch's reputation, the clean, careful authority he has spent 11 years building on the ashes of the operation that failed him, would not survive the week. The men who have spent 2 years circling her ranch, waiting for her to fail, would watch instead as the county's own inspector was exposed as a coward who mutilated an animal and then hid behind a badge to finish the job he started. It would be, in every practical sense, a complete and total victory. She turns the thought over for the better part of an afternoon, moving through her chores with the folder never far from reach, and more than once she catches herself composing, without meaning to, the exact sentence she would use to open that hearing, the exact pause she would leave before laying the photocopy on the table, the exact silence that would follow. It would not take much. A single line read aloud in front of the council that has spent 2 years treating her like a widow too fragile and too foolish to hold on to her own land would be enough to turn every one of those faces from pity to something closer to fear. And there is a version of her, tired enough and wronged enough, that wants that far more than she is proud to admit. She sets the folder down more than once that afternoon and does not touch it again until evening, as though it were something that could burn her if held too long. She drives home with the folder on the seat beside her, and that night, for the first time since she began, she does not read a letter to the Stallion at all. She sits in the folding chair with the file closed in her lap, and she watches him graze in the last gray light of evening, and she does not yet know, not that night, not for 2 more days, which version of justice she is capable of choosing. The days that follow move differently than the ones before them. The ordinary rhythm of feeding and mending and reading now shadowed by a decision she has not yet made, and it is Daniel's letters, in the end, that seem to press on her hardest during this stretch, because so many of them, written across 30 years by a man who buried more than one rival's cruelty without ever once trading it for cruelty of his own, return again and again to the same idea in different words, that a ranch built on getting even is a ranch that never stops needing to. She reads one such letter on the 16th night, written the year a competing breeder spread a false rumor about disease in the Vance herd that cost them a season's contracts, and Daniel's handwriting from that year is angrier than in almost any other letter in the box. And yet the letter itself is not about revenge. It is about the exhausting, deliberate discipline of not taking it, of rebuilding instead of retaliating, because a man who spends his strength on getting even has none left over for getting better. She reads it twice. The Stallion stands with his head over the rail the whole time, blind eye turned toward the house, good eye fixed on her face, as though he too is waiting to see what she decides to do with an old wound. On the 18th day, with 4 days remaining before the hearing, Garrett Holt returns to her gate, this time with a folded document already prepared, a purchase offer, low enough to be almost an insult, timed with the precision of a man who has been counting down the same 14 days she has. He tells her, not unkindly, that the commission rarely reverses a public safety seizure once it's been recommended by the county inspector, and that it might be easier, cleaner, for everyone, if she simply signed before the hearing rather than after it. Annalise takes the folded paper from his hand. She does not read it in front of him. She thanks him for coming by, and she tells him, in a voice that gives away nothing at all, that she intends to be at the hearing on Saturday with the horse, and that he is welcome to attend and see for himself. Garrett's expression falters, just slightly, the confidence of a man whose calculations have not accounted for the possibility of her actually succeeding. He leaves without another word, and Annalise stands at the gate holding his folded offer until his truck disappears down the ridge road. And then she walks back to the barn, past the round pen, past the Stallion who lifts his head at the sound of her boots on the gravel, and into the tack room, where she takes down a battered saddle that has not been used in 3 years and begins, for the first time, to clean the leather. The morning of the 19th day, Annalise drives to the county building not for the hearing. That is still 2 days off, but for a private meeting she requested herself. One the clerk was visibly surprised to schedule, given that it is Alistair Finch's own office she is asked to sit in. He receives her with the same careful neutrality he has worn since the day he first saw the stallion over her fence line. Offering coffee, she declines, gesturing to a chair across from a desk arranged with the precision of a man who does not like surprises. She sits. She does not waste time on pleasantries he clearly does not want, and she has no patience left to perform. She sets a single folder on his desk. Inside it is not the county's dry paperwork, but something smaller, more personal. A photocopy of the archived registration, the insurance claim, and a page from the vet's report describing, in clinical detail, the age and likely cause of a blind eye that has never once, in 11 years, been mentioned in any official file bearing his name. Finch does not open the folder immediately. He looks at it the way a man looks at a door he has spent a long time making sure stays shut, and something passes across his face that Annalise has seen only once before. The flicker at the gate, the day he first saw the horse, and, for one unguarded second, looked less like an inspector and more like a man meeting a ghost. When he finally opens the folder and reads, his hands are very still, and the silence in the office stretches long enough that the ticking of a wall clock becomes the loudest thing in the room. He does not deny it. He does not ask how she found it. He simply sits, staring down at the photocopied brand, at the insurance claim with his ranch's name typed plainly across the top, at a truth he has apparently spent 6 years believing was buried deep enough to stay buried. When he finally speaks, his voice has none of its usual clipped authority left in it. He asks her, quietly, what she intends to do with it. Annalise tells him she is not going to bring it to the hearing. She is not going to hand it to the council, or to the newspaper, or to anyone in this county who has spent 2 years waiting for a reason to finish what the rumors about her husband started. She tells him the folder is his, to do with as he decides, and that the only thing she wants from him in return is 14 days that were never really about public safety in the first place, and a hearing on Saturday where the horse is judged for what he actually is, not for a fear that Finch himself planted in him and then never took responsibility for. Finch does not answer right away. He sits with the folder open in front of him for a long time, and when Annalise finally rises to leave, he asks her, not as an inspector now, but as something closer to a man, why she isn't using it. Why, after everything this county has already taken from her, she would hand him the one thing that could make him pay for even a fraction of it. She pauses at the door. She tells him she has spent 2 years watching people use the truth as a weapon, and that she has decided she does not want to become fluent in a language that has already cost her so much. Then she leaves, and Alistair Finch remains alone at his desk, the folder open in front of him, the wall clock still ticking, a man confronted for the first time in 6 years with the exact shape of the thing he ran from. Saturday arrives cold and clear, the kind of hard blue autumn morning that makes the whole valley look freshly rinsed, mist still clinging to the low pastures as the sun climbs over the ridge. The Rural Commission holds its hearings in the same fairground arena where the county's 4-H shows are judged every summer. A low wooden grandstand ringed around a dirt corral, and by 9 in the morning, the stands are far fuller than a routine safety hearing has any right to draw. Word travels fast in a county this size, and everyone, it seems, wants to see whether the Vance widow's gamble has paid off or whether it will finally, publicly, confirm what half the valley has been whispering since Daniel died, that the Vance name, and everything attached to it, was never as solid as it looked. Garrett Holt sits near the front with 2 other council members, arms crossed, watching the gate with the studied patience of a man who still believes the numbers are on his side. Somewhere behind him, scattered through the stands, are neighbors who have not spoken a real word to Annalise since the funeral, drawn now by curiosity dressed up as civic duty. And near the judge's table, seated at the end with his clipboard closed for the first time anyone can remember, sits Alistair Finch, unreadable, his eyes fixed not on Annalise as she leads the stallion toward the gate, but on the horse himself, in a way that looks, to anyone paying close enough attention, less like inspection and more like penance. Annalise walks the stallion in on a loose lead, no chain, no blinders, no restraint beyond the soft cotton rope he has worn without protest for over a week now. He is groomed, his coat oiled to a deep and even black, his mane combed clean, and though his blind eye still turns instinctively from the crowd noise pressing in around the arena, his gait beside her is steady, unhurried, a far cry from the animal that came off that trailer 3 weeks ago, throwing his whole body against the world. The commission chair, a heavy-set man with a voice built for outdoor auctions, reads the county's original complaint aloud for the record, the language blunt and damning, unpredictable, dangerous, unsuitable for continued private ownership, and a low murmur moves through the stands, the sound of a verdict people believe they already know. Then he calls for the demonstration and asks Annalise to show the commission what 14 days have accomplished. She leads the stallion to the center of the corral. She does not raise her voice. She does not tighten the lead. She simply stands beside him and, in full view of the grandstand, unclips the rope from his halter and lets it fall to the dirt, leaving him standing free in the middle of an arena packed with strangers, engines idling in the lot beyond the fence, dogs barking somewhere near the concession stand. Every possible reason for a traumatized animal to bolt gathered into one single, overwhelming moment. The stallion does not bolt. For 3 long seconds that feel considerably longer to everyone watching, he simply stands there, ears working, blind side turned instinctively toward the open gate behind him, good eye fixed on the one point in the entire arena that has, for 2.5 weeks, meant safety. Then he walks, not skittish, not driven, but deliberate, unhurried, the way an animal moves towards something it has already decided to trust, until he is close enough to lower his head and rest it against Annalise's shoulder, exactly the way he is every night for the last week beside the round pen, except this time in front of the entire county that decided, 3 weeks ago, that this moment was never going to happen. The grandstand goes silent in a way that outdoor arenas rarely do. Somewhere in the stands, a child says something to a parent in a hushed voice, and the parent doesn't answer because the parent is watching the same thing everyone else is watching, a horse that killed no one, hurt no one, and simply, finally, put his head down. The commission chair clears his throat twice before he manages to speak again, and when he does, his voice has lost its blunt auction house edge, softened by something the whole arena just witnessed, and none of them quite has language for yet. He asks Dr. Finch, as the county's certifying authority, whether he has anything to add before a recommendation is entered into the record. Finch rises slowly from the judge's table. For a long moment, he says nothing at all, standing with his hands loose at his sides, looking at the horse the way a man looks at something he thought he had buried deep enough that it would never again stand in front of him in daylight. He begins, finally, not with the language of policy, but with something quieter, an admission that seems to cost him physically to produce, that the original complaint against this animal was based on an incomplete assessment, that a proper veterinary evaluation should have identified the underlying medical condition responsible for the behavior in question weeks ago, and that the county, and he personally, failed in that responsibility. Garrett Holt shifts in his seat, sensing the ground moving beneath a plan he has spent weeks assuming was already settled. He half rises, opens his mouth as if to object, but something in the set of Finch's shoulders as he turns toward the council section stops him before he manages a word. Finch does not stop there. He tells the commission that he is formally withdrawing the county's complaint in its entirety, that he is signing, effective immediately, a certificate of rehabilitation for the animal, releasing any further claim of public safety risk against the property. And then, in a voice that carries the particular weight of something a man has decided, alone, in the space of the last 2 days, to finally say out loud regardless of what it costs him, he adds one more thing, that he has personal knowledge of this animal's history that predates the auction, and that any failure of care this horse suffered in the past was not the fault of the woman standing in this arena, and was, in fact, entirely his own. He does not explain further. He does not need to. Annalise, standing in the center of the corral with her hand resting on the stallion's neck, meets his eyes across the dirt, and something passes between them that the crowd cannot fully read, but that Finch clearly understands is the only form of mercy he is ever going to receive for it, and it is, visibly, more than he expected to be given. The commission chair, working now from a script none of this morning's paperwork prepared him for, moves quickly to close the hearing, formally entering the withdrawal into the record and declaring the matter resolved. The grandstand empties in a low murmur of conversation that will keep the county's phone lines busy for the rest of the week, and Garrett Holt leaves without a word to anyone, his folded purchase offer still sitting, and signed, in the glove box of his truck. Alastair Finch does not leave with the rest of the crowd. He waits by the arena rail until the grandstand has mostly emptied, until Annalise has led the Stallion back toward her trailer, and then he crosses the dirt to meet her there, alone, in a way the two of them have never once stood alone together in 11 years of careful, guarded distance. He does not apologize the way people usually apologize, with easy words meant to close a wound quickly. He tells her, instead, standing at the trailer with his hat in his hands, about the accident itself. A training session gone wrong 6 years ago, a green rider he'd allowed on a horse not ready for one, a rear that put the boy in the dirt and put Cassius's eye into a fence post, and a decision made in the panicked hours afterward, with a lawsuit threatened and a reputation on the line, to make the horse disappear rather than answer for what happened to him. He tells her he has spent 6 years telling himself it was a business decision. He tells her that watching this horse put his head on her shoulder in front of the whole county was the first time in 6 years he let himself call it what it actually was. Annalise listens without interrupting. When he finishes, she does not offer him easy forgiveness, and she does not offer him further condemnation either. She tells him only that the horse doesn't know what he did. He only knows what she did every night for 3 weeks in the rain. And then she tells him that if he wants the debt between them settled, the way to settle it isn't with an apology to her at all. 3 days later, an anonymous wire transfer clears the account holding the Vance Ranch's outstanding property taxes and the second mortgage Daniel took out the year of the barn fire. The debt that has hung over Annalise for 2 years, the one detail Garrett Holt was counting on to force a sale eventually, regardless of what happened with the horse. The bank cannot say who authorized the transfer. Annalise does not ask. She already knows, and some knowledge, she has learned, is better carried quietly than spoken aloud. Winter comes early to the ridge that year, the first snow dusting the pastures by the second week of November, and by then the round pen has been retired in favor of the larger training paddock, where Annalise works the Stallion, Shadow, still, because some names earn the right to stay, through slow, patient sessions that build, week by week, toward a saddle he wears now without flinching, a bridle he accepts from her hand without hesitation, a bond built entirely without rope, burns, or raised voices, or any of the tools the auction yard assumed would be necessary to make him useful. She rides him for the first time on a gray morning in December, in the lower pasture, at a walk, no more than a slow circuit of the fence line, and it is not dramatic, not the kind of moment a lesser story might build toward. No rearing conquered, no dangerous test overcome in front of a cheering crowd. It is quiet. It is two creatures who have spent 3 months learning each other's blind sides, moving together across frost-hardened ground, and if there is triumph in it, it is the small, unglamorous triumph of two damaged things simply continuing, together, instead of alone. The barn roof gets finished before the snow sets in for good, the last of the shingles nailed down on a Sunday afternoon with the help, unexpectedly, of 2 ranch hands Alastair Finch sends over without being asked. Men who work the day in near silence and leave before Annalise can properly thank them, the way debts sometimes get paid when the person paying them can't yet stand to be thanked for it. Garrett Holt does not return to the gate again that winter. Word moves through the county, the way word always does, of what happened in that arena, of the folder that was never opened publicly, of the wire transfer no one can explain, and whatever calculations he was running on the Vance land quietly stopped making sense once the debt that made her vulnerable simply ceases to exist. The council does not mention her name in its meetings again that season. It is not forgiveness, exactly, that settles over the ranch in the months that follow. It is something closer to being left alone, which, for Annalise, turns out to be enough. Late that winter, on a night with snow falling soft and steady past the porch light, Annalise sits by the wood stove with the tin box open on her lap, one letter left unread, the last one Daniel ever wrote her, dated 11 days before the accident, folded so many times over 2 years that its creases have gone soft as cloth. She has never been able to read this particular one all the way through. Tonight, for the first time, she does. It is not a long letter. It says, in the plain, unpolished way he always wrote when he meant something most, that whatever happens to a ranch's name, whatever the neighbors decide to believe, the only thing that was ever actually theirs to lose was each other, and that he trusts her, more than he has ever trusted anyone, to know the difference between what matters and what only looks like it does from the road. She folds the letter closed for the last time and sets the box on the table beside her, and through the window, she can see the shape of the stallion out in the paddock, black against the snow, standing calm beneath a sky gone quiet and white. And there is no dramatic music swelling in this moment, no easy resolution wrapping the last 2 years into something tidy. There is only a woman who rebuilt a barn one board at a time, and a horse who learned that a blind side doesn't have to be a wound forever, and a debt of cruelty that got answered, in the end, not with more cruelty, but with the one thing this whole county forgot how to offer anybody: patience, extended without conditions, until something broken finally believed it was safe enough to stop bracing for the next blow. Spring comes back to the ridge the way it always does, without asking permission, green pushing up through the last gray patches of snow along the fence lines. Annalise mended herself, board by board, through a winter that could have broken her, and instead, somehow, did not. The barn stands whole now, roof tight against the weather, and in the paddock beside it, a black stallion who was once marked for destruction grazes with his blind side turned trustingly toward the house, toward the woman who taught him, one rain-soaked letter at a time, that not every hand raised near him was raised to hurt. She still keeps the tin box on her nightstand, though she reads from it less often now, not because the letters mean less, but because somewhere in that barn, in that paddock, in the quiet, unhurried rhythm of a life rebuilt without anyone's permission, she has found a version of Daniel's voice that no longer needs paper to reach her. The county remembers this story the way counties remember most things, imperfectly, in fragments, softened at the edges by retelling. They remember the widow and the wild horse. Fewer of them remember, or care to say aloud, the part about the inspector who once looked away from something he could have fixed, and the woman who found the proof of it and chose, deliberately, not to use it as a weapon. But on the ranch itself, in the quiet hours before dawn when Annalise crosses the yard to feed, and the stallion lifts his head at the sound of her boots the way he has every morning for over a year now, that part of the story is the only part that ever really mattered. Not what the world decided about either of them, but what they decided, together, to become once nobody was left there to watch. Some debts get settled with money. Some get settled with an apology nobody wanted to give and everybody needed to hear. And some, the deepest ones, the ones carved into scar tissue and silence and years of bracing for a blow that never stops coming, only ever get settled the slow way, the way Annalise Vance settled hers, not by winning, and not by getting even, but by sitting outside a fence in the cold rain, night after night, until something that the world had already given up on finally believed it was allowed to come home. If this story stayed with you tonight, you already know why some people never stop believing in second chances, and why the quietest kind of strength is often the one nobody claps for. Tell us in the comments which moment hit you hardest, and if you've made it this far, hit subscribe, because there's another story like this one waiting for you next, and it starts the way the best ones always do, with someone the world already decided to give up on.